Hey everyone, I'm outside. I'll be honest with you, I've had a really hard time finding the motivation to put up this last lecture. I think there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, The Water Dancer is not a great book. It's not very good. Let's just be completely honest about that. I think we have a tendency sometimes to think that a book that is assigned ought to be a great book. Um, that's not always true. I think it's actually really important for us to be able to discern whether or not a book has literary merit or whether or not a book has some sort of artistic value. Um, and whether or not it doesn't. And it's okay if it doesn't. It's okay to say that this book is not all it's cracked up to be or that it's not great. I think it's also okay, just sort of as a footnote to that, to say it's okay to like a thing that is not great. I like many things that aren't very good. And I think that it's good to recognize the difference between those two things. To say I like it, even though it doesn't succeed in its aims or it's poorly executed at a number of points or whatever. It's also something else to say I didn't like it and it's not great, but there's something valuable in it. I think that's a good way to approach a book like this, is to say um, we can get something from this, something meaningful and something productive. This book does engage in a conversation with the other texts that it interacts with. Like all contemporary literature, like all literature, it's part of a dialogue, and it does contribute to that dialogue. Whether or not it's successful in its aims is almost beside the point. Whether or not it's something that I've enjoyed reading or you have enjoyed reading is also more or less beyond the point. Our job as critics, in this sense, not just literary critics, but also social critics, is to look at a text and consider the ways that it represents or engages or critiques the culture that it speaks to and the conversation that it's part of. That said, you don't have to like the book, and that's okay. Also, if you do like the book, that's also okay. You don't have to defend your like for a thing. You don't have to convince someone that it's actually a good book if it's not, just because you liked it. You could just say, "I liked it," and that's okay also. Um, but that's honestly part of the reason why it's taken me so damn long to put this thing up. So I apologize for the delay on getting this out. The second reason why I feel this is hard. This is hard. The last day of a class, my entire career, I've wanted to treat as a capstone. I've wanted to treat as the moment we can draw things together, we can think about those larger points, and we can consider the ways that the content of the class might move out into the real world. Um, we don't have that option here. This has been a really weird semester. I don't need to explain to you the ways that it's been weird. You've had plenty of time to consider that yourself, I'm sure. Uh, I hope that the things that we've encountered in this class are going to be things that you're able to carry with you. You may not, have stored away in your mind all of the things that Zizek has to say about the Anthropocene. You may not have a clear idea of what Meillassoux is doing, but hopefully you've gained something out of each of these texts, out of each of these theoretical approaches, and out of each of these literary discussions that we've engaged in the class. And I hope that you'll find ways to begin to deploy those things toward your own understanding of the world and your own read of not just situations you'll encounter in the future, but the situations you find yourself in now. This is the context in which a dialogue is formed. This context you're in right now. This context of being isolated and distanced. This context of being overwhelmed by stress. This context of feeling left out. All of these things are the places that discussions begin at. Uh, you can find on the internet just about anywhere the laundry list of books that have been written during quarantine. Some of the great works of literature come out of quarantine times. I'm not saying that to put a burden on you to go write the next great work of literature, but just to remind you that even these times are times of dialogue. Even these times are times that require engagement and critical engagement to unpack and to understand. Um, in that spirit, I do believe that there are things that we find in the Water Dancer that could be useful to us. I feel the approach that we've taken to this book through critical race theory is essential. We cannot understand the current climate without also understanding critical race theory, without considering it as part of the dialogue and the conversation that we need to continue to have. Um, At no point can we claim that race is finished or over. At no point can we claim that the problem has been solved. And at no point can we pretend that race does not function into the systems of power that make up modernity. To do so, to ignore it, would be to be blind to it. And that's a position that people of privilege can and often do take, but one that I would encourage you to resist as best you can. Um, Engaging this kind of criticism can be difficult, I understand that, but it's also essential for us. It helps to reframe and reconsider all the other things that we've read as well. Once we find, there's something that we get from Paul Gilroy, the idea that the shadow of modernity, this thing that arises at the exact same time and represents all the opposites that the Enlightenment wants to offer, this idea of race and slavery, emerges with modernity. It is modernity. It is the opposite side of modernity. And being that, it becomes the critique of modernity as well. We want to say that modernity is all about liberty, is all about freedom, is all about brotherhood, and yet at the same time, it is the emergence of the slave trade. Uh, so to have that massive contradiction right in the middle of it, and I mean, think about what Hegel has to say about contradiction. Contradiction is the root of advancement. Contradiction is the place that we can begin to move forward in a dialogue about something else. And if we ignore the contradiction, we'll never get there. Please don't ignore the contradiction. Please pay attention to these things. They're deeply important. I think what specifically the Water Dancer offers us is maybe a couple of nuances on the whole thing, though. One of the things that I really liked about this is that the way that memory works here. I mean, this is one of the big themes in the book is memory. Um, Toni Morrison writes about memory, I think, far more compellingly, but Coates is in dialogue with this idea of memory, the need for memory. And the way Coates puts it here, I think, is really important. He considers memory as a form of bearing witness. And to not forget is to maintain one's witness of the world, of seeing the things that are happening and paying attention to the things that are happening. At its very root, at its heart, critical theory is that it is bearing witness. It is a refusal to look away, and it can be hard to do that. It's easy to bury your head in the sand or to pretend like these things aren't happening when they are happening. It's easier to distract ourselves with pop culture or with popcorn or with whatever other sorts of uh, uh, you know distractions we want to allow in. But to do so is to ignore the results and the dynamics that happen in powerful interactions. Um, to be a critic is to bear witness, to not look away. It's a heavy burden to carry. Uh, it's a hard calling, to live out. And it's one that, in full disclosure and in full honesty, I have not always been successful at. We sometimes fail in this. But if the goal is to bear witness, we should always be reminded. We should always be called back to look at these things carefully and to understand them um, in the full power that they can give us. Um, I think the other thing this book gives us is the other thing this book gives us is uh, see, a car just drove by and now I've lost my focus on what I was going to say. Hey, this happens. Yeah, the other thing it gives us, I think, is this. You have this really interesting interaction between Hiram and Corinne, these two characters that now are become major figures in the underground, right? Corinne has this great vision to liberate all of the South. She wants to strike at the heart of slavery and destroy the slaveholders where they sit in their homes. Um, Whereas Hiram, his goal is to get the people that he loves. He wants to find and care for the people that he cares about. Uh, I think what's interesting about that is that we really have two different philosophies at work there. One philosophy, it's spelled out for us in the text as well. One philosophy would be to say that Corinne wants to destroy the thing that has made her feel ashamed of her humanness. Look, everyone, the book is pretty clear about this. We've talked about this in previous lectures. Everyone is capable of doing atrocious things. Everyone might. And the system of slavery, one of its horrific things is that it has made monsters out of people. In dehumanizing people, it has made monsters out of them. This is actually one of the things that shows up in one of those early drafts of the Declaration of Independence. Part of the reason why the founding fathers are pissed at England is because of the slave trade. They've said that King George, one of his atrocities, is saddling the colonies with this slave economy that we can't get out of. You've turned us into these horrible monsters. He says that's is a cop out, right? And the book does too. It says, like, listen, all that really does, that whole mentality is just to make oneself feel good about themselves. Corinne's whole goal is not to end slavery. It's to heal her own sense of herself. It's to heal something that she feels is an affront to her pride, maybe more specifically. Hiram's point is very different. Hiram's point is to find the people that he loves. Here's the big difference. Corinne wants to destroy the system. Hiram wants to save the souls. Corinne wants to deconstruct. Hiram wants to build relationship. As a way of closure for this class, I want us to consider that difference. There's a way that we can use these methods and these tools to critique systems of injustice. That's important and that's necessary. There's a way that we can use these tools and these theories to deconstruct power, to engage in a very vocal critique of institutions that dehumanize. That's an important tool. But it's also very easy to lose sight of the people that have been dehumanized. It's very easy to use a kind of activism or a kind of critique to pat yourself on the back and say, I have engaged in social justice. It's something else entirely to go to the enslaved, to go to the brokenhearted, to go to the dispossessed, and to give them love. I would even say maybe there's two paths to choose with this use of critical theory, and why studying something like critical theory, as difficult as it can be, is so essential. And I would encourage you to not allow the tools of critical theory to simply be deconstructive, to merely engage in critique, but rather to allow those tools to shine a light into the dark places in which the people who have been pushed to the margins are now hiding. And to do so for the purpose of reconciliation, to do so for the purpose of finding them and hearing them. More than anything else, to do so for the purpose of loving them. That's it. I've enjoyed this class. I hope you've enjoyed this class too. We've read a lot of weird stuff, a lot of things that I recognize you probably wouldn't have read on your own, and a lot of things that probably also deeply offended you. I thank you for trusting me to walk through those things with you. And I thank you also for allowing me to walk through them too. I'm not sure I would have, chosen to read something like Boneyard for funsies. But at the same time, having the chance to think through a difficult thing and to talk about it with you all, it's been really rewarding, and it's always really rewarding for me. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you for your energy and for your effort. Thank you for your tenacity, for sticking with it even to the end, and for your grace on a very late lecture.